Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. I hope you're having a good day. We're going to conclude Code Girls with the same sort of rubric or the same sort of uh, idea about how to go through a book: character, conflict, connection, and theme. We're going to spend a lot of time today on connections. And again, as I said, character, conflict, connections, and theme. We focused on character and conflict in the previous presentation. Today, we're going to talk about connections, and I'll do a hint of what I believe one of the major themes of this book is. As far as concluding everything, one of the things that I hope you take out of Code Girls and out of the other three books we read is this statement by Rod Dreher: a good story is a good story. I don't care if it explores the hidden lives of paraplegic Tibetan lesbians. If it's a well told story, we all see ourselves in the characters and the lives they lead, no matter their race, their class, their culture. I think that this is key, especially for those of us who are post World War II, who weren't part of what, Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation, trying to make some connections, trying to see ourselves in the lives of these stories, lives of these characters, excuse me, I think is important. Let's take a look and try to find a few connections here, shall we? First of all, I think there's the effects of big events. We see this line about the Second World War was tearing at America's social fabric. As I said, I'm an old man, but even I'm not old enough to remember World War II. However, I think as I go through my life, there are a lot of things that have torn at America's social fabric. Sputnik. I was born in 1957. It's not like I have a memory of this, but certainly the space race, Kennedy, vowing to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade of the 1960s, that was a big chunk of my growing up, watching the launches, all of those sorts of things. And I think Sputnik tore at the social fabric a little bit. It created a sense of fear in the United States about what if Russia is way ahead of us. Vietnam certainly tore at the social fabric. The anti-war movement, the struggle against, the draft, those sorts of things, I think was a huge part of, again, tearing at a social fabric, along with the racial strife of the 1960s. And I've just lumped those two kind of together in the Vietnam era. Watergate certainly was one of the things that tore at the political element of the social fabric during my lifetime. The energy crisis, um, gas when I was my first year in college was 19 cents. When it ran to 60 cents, that was like the end of the world. And dealing with that and dealing with the fact that the world was becoming far more interconnected and the United States needed to, adapt to other countries and what they were doing, I think, again, was something that ripped at the social fabric a little bit. Fall of the Soviet Union, it was the thing that dominated my entire life. It was part of the Sputnik thing. All of a sudden now we have a different way of dealing with, you know, the world. I think that changed a little bit. Perhaps it was a mending of the social fabric more than a tearing. I don't know, but it certainly changed the social fabric. The rise of the internet, I'm not going to go into detail there. I think enough has been written about that and how it changed everything. The Great Recession certainly was a reset. It wasn't something, the economic problems there were huge. I think they affected nearly everyone. And certainly the pandemic had a huge effect on everyone. The next one, if we just go to some big events and you take a look at about the third or fourth line here, undergraduates began rolling bandages sewing blackout curtains, taking first aid courses, learning to do plane spotting, sending bundles to Berlin. Meat became scarce, and dorm rooms grew cold from lack of fuel. Wasn't that long ago in the United States that people were fighting over toilet paper in Walmarts, screaming at each other if they were wearing a mask, if they were not wearing a mask. Depending on one's point of view, they were screaming at each other. They were arguing over treatments for a disease they had never heard of 6 months ago. And there were shortages of all sorts of random household goods. All of that was part of 2020. It was, I think, connections we can make to changing the way we lived based on the events beyond our control. And I think it's important, again, to try to make connections to the characters, but also I think we can try to make connections to the plots or to the historical events if it's nonfiction. Okay. On the other hand, I think sometimes connections are, oh my God, how did they live this way? The idea of no phone calls, no in person visits, and having a relationship via a letter. All right? Back and forth with letters. In 2023, people still share nearly everything online, whether it's old folks on Facebook, young people on TikTok, sharing each stuff with each other via Snapchat, whatever it is. It seems to me that it's not through purely correspondence. And even if we don't have in-person visits, we do have phone calls, and there's Zoom, there's FaceTime. There are all of those sorts of things that are much closer to regular conversation and being with people than sitting down, writing a letter, putting a stamp on it, dropping it in the mail, waiting 2, 3, 4, 6 days, maybe a week, maybe a little bit longer for it to get someplace, waiting for the person to write a response, waiting for the response to get mailed back. I mean, even email is almost instantaneous compared to that. And again, I think connections can be, for lack of a better phrase, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday moments. The underline section, if we can look at that first. I started to send you some silk stockings from Brazil, but didn't know how you'd like the idea of me buying you clothes. He had sent each of his sisters a pair. If you'd like some, just send me your size, and I'll ask a friend in Brazil to get some. If you're sending something to your sisters, dude, you probably should send something to your girlfriend. Also, I think it's important to, no matter what we're doing here, understand that there are things that make connections that we shouldn't expect very much. And that Brazil connection, I think, is one of them. And from the weird to this is sort of like us. Crow had started crying when she heard Jim Bruce was coming back. It wasn't that she was jealous. It was just that she was going to miss the easy and companionable friendship, their excursions, their breakfast, their shared jokes. In other words, this whole idea that evolving friendships based on people getting married, based on people moving away, based on all sorts of things, that friendships can evolve. Again, this should be something that resonates with all of us. You guys have left your hometowns. You have made new friends here. You have left a few friends behind. You're bringing a few friends along with you. Those evolving friendships have changed. As people get married, friendships change. Those sorts of things, I think, again, this is sort of like us. Not being able to communicate by anything other than letters, that's probably not sort of like us. This, it strikes me, is something we can understand, something we can, deal with. The other thing I think that this book did huge and should make us think about pendulum switches, propaganda, and us. Post-war government, no more state-sponsored child care. All of a sudden, child care was viewed with suspicion. It was something the communists did. And all of a sudden, it was unnatural for women to be the breadwinners. 4 years earlier, women were urged to go into the workforce. Women were urged to commit to the war effort. Women were urged to do everything they could to free up men to go fight the enemy. Now, being a breadwinner was quote unquote unnatural. And I think, again, to go back to the quotation that started this all, can we see ourselves in this situation? What does this situation have to do with us? And I think the answer is very simple. Who's manipulating the information we get? We get it through Facebook or TikTok or whatever we get it through. Who's manipulating the information that we get? How are we being manipulated? And the idea of this is unnatural or that is unnatural, the idea that there are these, nebulous people called communists who raise their children collectively and they're going to destroy the American fabric, means we change from what we were doing during the war to something new. And I think, again, to tie back to this class, are we thinking critically? Are we thinking critically about all of the information we get? Are we doing things to wonder about why people are saying what they're saying? Whether it's the government, whether it's Uncle Bob on Facebook, whether it's a TikTok influencer, whether it's an Instagram influencer, are we thinking critically about the information we get? Or are we just grabbing onto it and saying, yeah, this is it? Okay. And then I think one of the things I've learned in my old age is that it's a vicious circle. If you look at the bottom of this quotation, the nation lost talent that the war had developed. The 1950s and 1960s would not bring about another critical mass of women to succeed the wartime codebreakers, and in the 1970s and 80s, women at the NSA would have to fight a battle for parity and recognition all over again. It was just a vicious circle. They fought for recognition in the 40s. They didn't have people to carry on the fight in the 50s and 60s, so they had to pick up the fight in the 70s and 80s. Whether it's silly things like fashion or music or things like that, I've seen the 70s come around, I think, twice now. And we're just going to kind of see a circle happening again and again and again. And I think, if nothing else, that's probably one of the themes that this book should point out, is that the vicious circle will always happen. Another one that I think is more important, and I'm going to make a really bad analogy here. I watch a lot of cooking shows, and I watch a lot of cooking competition shows. And it strikes me that in the cooking competition shows, the male chefs almost always seem to disregard the female chefs. And it seems to me that that happens in a lot of professions. And so if you look at the underlined section, it could be that women didn't matter quite as much as men did. That's possible. It could be that women didn't care what women did in private. That's possible. It could be that women working in intelligence were thought of as honey traps, capable of using their sex to lure a man into betraying his country, rather than as complicated human beings with quiet but rich interior lives. And I stumbled upon this article earlier this year. I think that one of the themes, and we believe America ought to be committed to human dignity, even for those with whom we disagree. I think that that's kind of what the book is trying to get to. Were these women viewed as humans with human dignity, or were they viewed as something less than that? And are we continuing to view people as worthy of acceptance because they have human dignity, even if we disagree with them, even if they are doing things we have a yuck factor towards? Or are we somehow, way or another, trying to, create an other? And I think this book makes us ask the question. I think that's a question worth delving into through nonfiction, through fiction, through discussion. I think that's part of the, you know, idea of our religious life, our intellectual life. How ought we treat other people? And I think if this book makes us think about that, that's important. I'm going to wrap it up right here. Hope to see all of you the next class period. And again, I hope everyone's having a good day. If you have questions, ask me in class or shoot me an email.